Give people just another second to come on, and then we will kick this off. All right, while everyone's coming in, just to mention, we're going to kick this off in just a second. Thanks so much for joining us today. I will introduce you to our presenter today in just a second. We are recording today's session, so you don't have to worry about taking any notes unless you want to. We will kick this off. And apologies, you're not going to get to see my face today because I'm a little bit under the weather. So, okay. With that, I will kick this off. Our presenter today is Scott Love. Scott is the founder of the Attorney Search Group, a legal recruiting firm, and works with law firms nationally to recruit rainmaking partners and high-performing associates. He's on the board of the National Association of Legal Search Consultants and has been quoted in the American Lawyer, Above the Law, Law 360, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and dozens of other business publications. He produces a top 3% podcast on client development called the Rainmaking Podcast and enjoys speaking at business conferences on the topics of business development and recruiting. Scott is the author of Why They Follow, How to Lead with Positive Influence, and the co-author of Rainmaker Confidential. He's a graduate of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and is a former surface warfare officer in the United States Navy. And with that, I will turn it over to Scott, who is going to be talking to us today about better than a coin flip, how to use game theory to get better odds of a lateral hire. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm excited to be here. And it's great to, I guess I can't say it's great to see you again, but it's great to talk with you again, as always.
It's great to talk to you too.
Great. And thanks everybody for joining. I'll get right to the point. I'm here to help you shorten the learning curve in terms of knowing how to recruit your people more effectively. There's a reason why attorneys join firms. I've been recruiting since 1995. I started in the legal niche probably about 12 years ago. And like Lindsay said, that's all we do is recruit attorneys from one firm to another. So we talk to lawyers all the time. We know exactly what makes them tick in terms of why they leave a firm and why they join a firm. And the reason I call this better than a coin flip is if you look at the industry statistics, what are the odds of that person working out? Maybe 50%. How do we get better odds? And so I use game theory as a way to help people get better odds of a successful hire. So the outcome is to help you find greater success in selling your firm to prospective attorneys. And I use the S word. We're selling our firm, even though I know you're attorneys and you don't sell, you do business development, you do client development, you do rainmaking. When you're recruiting, you're selling. I mean, you are clearly selling. I don't mean used car salesman wearing a polyester leisure suit. I'm talking professional classical salesmanship. And I'm going to give you some ideas on that. In fact, we're going to cover these 4 things. We're going to talk about how to identify points of distinction in your firm that are attractive. I'll tell you this, when people say, what's different about your firm? You know what I hear? I ask them, what's different about your firm? We've got great culture. The problem with that is that everybody has great culture. It's kind of like saying we're selling a car. What's unique about your car? Well, our car has airbags. Well, they all have airbags. So we're going to find other ways that can help you identify points of distinction that are going to attract people to you. We're going to talk about how do you interview prospective laterals. We're going to talk about how you can improve your internal processes. I'll give you a few tips on that. And then we're also going to wrap it up with connection points, and we'll talk about what that means here later. And then hopefully we'll have some time for a little bit of Q&A at the end. So why do I talk about game theory? Well, I'll tell you this, I'll never forget the very first time I was ever kicked out of a casino. Years ago, back in 2005, I used to do a lot of keynote speaking. I'd speak at sales conferences. I'd find myself in Vegas. I don't want to gamble. I don't want to spend money on craps or roulette. I don't have any control over the outcome, but I heard that blackjack was the game that has a memory. and I would read books on counting cards. And basically what you're doing when you're counting cards, you're exploiting the casino in a game. There's a defect in the game of blackjack that you can legally take advantage of if you understand how the math works and you're not using mechanical or electrical or electronic equipment. But the bad side of that is that they can kick you out. They can say, sir, we'd like for you to refrain from playing blackjack for the rest of the evening, but help yourself to craps and roulette. And the first time they told me that, I said, why would I do that? That's like gambling. So I got good at this. It became a side business. I got so good, in fact, that I reached out to two legendary card counters, Mike Aponte and David Irvine, that were on the legendary MIT blackjack team that the book Bringing Down the House and the movie 21 were based on. And so for a year and a half, they mentored me. So I learned from that experience. I didn't like playing it that much after a year and a half of spending 8 hours a day doing math, sitting next to smoking smokers from all over the world that were loud, and in Vegas. It just wasn't my thing. But I'll tell you one thing I learned. I learned how to identify trends and how to identify patterns that help me to make effective business decisions. And I'll tell you about game theory. How do we apply this to lateral recruiting? Let me give you a test. I want you to look at the trends and see if you can tell the difference between picture A and picture B. Now pay real close attention. You're going to miss it. But see if you can identify the trends in these two photos. This is the first one, and this is the second one. You saw it. You picked it up. There's a crazy little angel hamming up the camera right there. So let me kind of bring this to a business level, an overview of game theory. When you're making a decision, you want to take action when variables align with a highly probable favorable outcome. That means that when we know the odds are high, we want to put money on the felt. And when I would be a professional, when I was counting cards, you would look at what is the ratio between the high value and low value cards, what is the count, and you would bet in proportion. You would bet in proportion to your advantage. When you had a highly favorable outcome, you would bet a lot based on the proportion. When the count would go negative, you'd sit out of the hand. So in other words, we want to do things in our lateral recruiting processes that will give us better odds. And then secondly, those variables that we have control over, we want to influence them so that we can increase odds in our favor. So let me talk about some principles and premises that govern success in recruiting. And to give you some perspective, I've been recruiting, like I mentioned, in 1995. In 2002, I started a training company. I'd achieved some success in recruiting. I started teaching people how to recruit, how to sell. Over 4,500 staffing and recruiting companies had invested in my tools over the years. And eventually I sold that business just so I could focus on recruiting. And so what I learned more than anything by really studying recruiting is that it is in sales. That's what I mentioned before. You need to understand, how do you sell? And whenever you're in sales, you want to focus less on features, benefits, and more on what is the buying motive of your prospect. Here's an example. I had a candidate who 6 months ago, I reached out to him, and he works in a certain practice, and he's got some frustrations in what he's looking to do and wants to leave his firm. And I asked him, I said, what's the criteria of an opportunity that would be optimal for you? And he told me about that. And I came across that recently, and I reached back out to him, and I knew exactly what motivated him. So now I knew how to present the opportunity. It seems very simple, yet most people miss that. So remember that when you're in sales, it's less about features and benefits, more about what is the intrinsic motivation of your prospect. The second key principle is to realize that recruiting, it's an exercise of nuanced communication. There are subtleties in how we communicate to people. If we communicate in a way that seems harsh, they're going to have a negative connotation about the culture of our firm. They're going to think, oh, people are mean over there. If we don't respond, then people are going to think that we're incompetent. If we have a document that we send to them, we want you to fill out our 14-page LPQ, which stands for long, painful questionnaire. No, it really stands for lateral partner questionnaire. If there are errors in that document from the firm, which I've seen before, they're going to have a negative perspective of your firm. If they look at that document and if it's too difficult or ambiguous to fill out, you're asking the same question 3 different ways on this document. I've seen that before. These are top firms that I'm talking about. Remember that document, that's part of your communication. That's going to have nuance to it. The other principle is realizing that recruiting is an exercise of executing the process. And you want to always look for ways you can improve your process. And I'll tell you about tactical ways you can do this shortly. So I've met with over 60 law firms over the years, pre-COVID, in their offices, talking about recruiting. I've met staff, recruiting coordinators. I've met recruiting directors. I've met chief talent officers, managing partners, and in a lot of cases, chairmen of firms of all different sizes. And the pitfalls I've seen that firms fall into when they recruit, one of them is that their focus is on the seller, not the customer. Think of it like that. You're selling a product. Your product is opportunity. You have a product that you want to sell. And what firms tend to do, they tend to tout the features and benefits. And what they should do instead is probe. There are 20 different reasons why lateral partners or lateral associates have joined our firm and have done well. Everybody's different. Tell me, Mr. Prospect, before I go into what our firm is all about, tell me about your current situation. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning everything's perfect, where are you in that range? It's obviously not a 10, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. And find out, you're asking them, where are you in terms of your current satisfaction? I'm probably about a 5, so what's keeping it from being a 10? Leadership, what do you mean by that exactly? Strategy, what do you mean by that exactly? And take note of that. And the other question you can ask them is this, before I go into the details of our opportunity, in terms of the criteria of a situation that would be optimal for you, what would that look like to you? And those are questions I personally ask every candidate. If you're working with a headhunter, a recruiter like myself, make sure you get that information. If you're not, if you have somebody even in your office, talk about those things. The focus shouldn't be on your firm. It should be on that person. And I'll tell you this, people make a judgment about you based on the quality of questions that you ask. As you're asking about them, they're probably going to think, wow, this is one of the best interviews I've ever had, because they really are taking an interest in me and they're wanting to know about what my goals are, about what my hopes and dreams and fears are, and they're taking that interest. So keep that in mind. It's rare because obviously, oh, well, they're interviewing with our firm. We've got to talk about our firm. And yes, you do, but only talk about those points that are interesting to that prospect. So the focus has to be on the customer. It has to be on the person that is interviewing with your firm. Now, here's something else related to this, is that the persona of an effective attorney is to have all the answers. And you know this because you're with your clients, you've got to have all the answers. And so it might be that persona comes out. With this, it's a little bit different. The persona has to be, let's collaborate together and see if we can find whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. And if it is, we can continue the conversation. And if it's not, then I'm happy to have at least met you. Before I tell you about my firm, tell me about your current situation. Tell me about your ideal opportunity. What does that look like? And so that's how you can kind of set that up in the conversations. You want to make sure that you talk about this. You want to make sure that as the conversation continues from one person to another, that those talking points convey as well. So the next problem and pitfall is a lack of distinction. When you've seen one big law firm, you've seen them all, right? Well, every firm is different, and you know that. And when I talked about culture, that's one thing, and I don't want to downplay it because culture is important. Let me give you an example. When you go to a fantastic restaurant and you're going to tell your friends about this restaurant, how are you describing it? The food was delicious. The service was fantastic. The environment was great. What you're not doing is you're not saying the food is very nutritious. Culture is like nutrition to a restaurant. we want to talk about how delicious it is. Culture is more of an internal retention variable rather than an external sales variable. So keep that in mind. Another one is lack of awareness in messaging and optics. When you're meeting with the partner that has a book of business, and I never forget the first time I met with the chairman of a top 100 firm, I told him, I said, lateral partner recruiting is the most effective form of client development. He was like, moment of silence. What did you say? I said, think about that. When you bring a partner that has a book of business, it's not necessarily the top line revenue. It's that handful of the cadre of clients, the relationships that partner, that he or she has developed over the years, that trust. You're bringing over trust is what you're doing. Whenever you bring a partner over that has portable business, it's not just the partner, you're bringing all those clients. So when you're interviewing a lateral partner with a book, you want to treat those meetings the same way that you would with the same level of attention to detail, the same way you would finesse it, the same enthusiasm and priority that you would with the prospective client, because that's exactly what it is. And then the other pitfall I've seen is that there's a lack of knowing how to convey the message and the narrative. And then it all defaults down to culture, which isn't the most effective way to convey a firm. So another pitfall I've seen is that there's a lack of leadership support. The partners don't contribute many times in the interviewing process. Well, the ROI, it's not immediate. Or the partners don't understand the vision and the purpose of all this recruiting nonsense. Or the staff are left working with the feeling of emptiness because there's no leadership support, eventually moving on to another opportunity. And if it is a high-level staff person that you have, they need to have the authority to execute and build collaboration among the partnership. They need to have that political capital. I've seen it all different ways within firms. I've seen chief talent officers that are able to snap their fingers and partners execute, partners get involved, and I've seen it the other way. If somebody is a high-level staff, they need to borrow your authority from the leaders, and that is earned over time. So the leaders must invest in giving political capital to the high-level staff. That's something that's a real important variable for them. So let me talk about how to sell your firm. So it all starts about what is important to people. And what is important to people is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow, as many of you remember from your college psychology classes in the 1960s, was a professor. He was a consultant, a management consultant, and he came up with what is the most widely adopted model of human need. At the bottom, we have our physiological needs: food, clothing, water, shelter. Above that, we have a need for safety. Above that, we have a need to belong. Above that, we have a need for esteem, also known as recognition. And then finally, our top need is self-actualization, the need to be fulfilled in the work that we do. So when you interview people, you want to keep this in mind. Sometimes when I talk to partners, I will convey that this is an opportunity in which you can become a significant contributor. You can make a difference. Whenever I've got two colleagues that do associates, one recruits just the Northeast, the other recruits nationally. And we tell them, or when they talk to candidates, they're able to sell an opportunity based on the significance that associate will achieve in that firm. So keep this in mind as you're looking for ways to sell your opportunity. Remember, you don't want to pitch, you want to probe based on the two things I mentioned. What are those intrinsic motivations that are keeping them from being completely fulfilled? And what is their ideal opportunity? You can think of it like this: what are the pushes and what are the pulls? And as we convey, think of how you can communicate some of the top three areas to them. It's more than just the comp. It has to be about the belonging. It has to be about the recognition and the self-actualization. So everybody's talking about all the associate raises. I recommend when you make your offers to your associates, it's not just that, but also talk about these things as well. How can they become a part of the team? How can they earn recognition? How can we help them reach their full potential? Let me talk a little bit about some of the points of distinction that I've seen and give you guys some ideas. And actually, let me come to that in just a second. I'm getting ahead of myself here. When we communicate with people and we're selling, we want to follow certain principles of influence. We can't control people. We can't manipulate them, but we can influence them. There is an author and a speaker named Robert Cialdini, and I'd met him years ago, and I got to know him and his wife. This is back in the mid 90s, back when I lived in Phoenix, Arizona. And he was a professor at ASU, Arizona State University. And he studied the reasons why people say yes. He said that there are certain principles that we can follow. He calls it the click and whir formula, where we have a machine. If we're going to press a button, the machine's going to spin every time. When we press the button, the machine's going to work the same way people are. If we press this button, this is the result we're going to get. And it's based on our genetic makeup and also our social conditioning. We're taught in certain rules in our society that if you do a favor for me, I have to say thank you. If I don't say thank you, then I'm a jerk, and society will cast us out. So there are several different principles that govern success. I'm going to share some of these with you in specific examples of how you can use these when you are selling your opportunity to your prospective candidates. The first one is what I call, or what Dr. Cialdini calls, the contrast principle. Now look at these two buildings on the screen. And how would you describe them? You would probably say one is old and one is new, because that's the point I wanted to make. Or one is brick and one is glass, but you really see the age difference in these buildings. That was the point. If you just saw the brick building and I showed that to you, tell me about this building, you might say that's a red building. I wanted to emphasize the age. So I put a newer building behind it to show the age of that front building. So we can use certain variables to contrast one against the other and make a certain point. Think of it like this. You've got 3 buckets of water in front of you. The bucket in the middle is room temperature. The bucket on the right is hot. The bucket on the left is cold. If you put your right hand in the hot water, left hand in the cold water, now you put them both in the room temperature water. The hand that was in the hot water feels cooler. The hand that was in the cool water feels warmer. It's the exact same temperature, but we're able to make a point by contrasting certain variables against it. I remember when my son who's 21, when he was about 5 or 6 years old, we would go to Toys R Us every Saturday, and he would have a $5 toy budget. And you can buy 3 Matchbox cars for $5. And I saw him this past week, and we were talking about this, where he would go through the whole toy store. I'd say, bring back 3 toys. We're going to evaluate the toy value of each toy and determine the best decision for you. And he would bring 3 toys. We talk about the toy value. And one day, and so whenever we'd be there, if he saw a toy that was $10, I would say, we can get that, but that means you're going to have to go 2 weeks without getting another toy. And he'd have to think about that. And he'd know, he always knew I'd never go above the $5 budget for each trip. Well, one day, we're leaving to go to Toys R Us. And he says, Daddy, today, why don't we have a toy budget of $150? And I said, no way. You're out of your mind. And he said, well, how about $15? And I thought, okay, $15. Like, wait a minute. You out-negotiated your old man. I didn't know if I should be upset or proud, right? And so what did he do to his toy profit for the day? He tripled it. How long did it take for him to do that? Seconds. What was his cost? It was nothing. He contrasted one variable with something else. This is something that we use with attorneys all the time. I'll say, here's an opportunity that I'm not certain, but I believe could get you what you want. Compared to the rest of your career, I'm not asking you to leave your firm, but compared to the rest of your career, just spend an hour, have a conversation. I contrast the length of time they have to an hour. It doesn't seem like that big of an ask, does it? Or my associate colleagues, when they talk to candidates, they say, compared to other markets, this is a good time for you to move. This is the time. Compared to other times in our society, this is the time you should consider making a move. So when you're talking with your candidate, you need to use some salesmanship. You talked about people not being able to help out. Let me give you some examples of how colleagues help each other. There was an all hands on deck situation 2 weeks ago. People came in, we had doc review here, we were able to service the client immediately. Everybody pitched in. You can contrast one thing with something else. So think of these like tools in your tool belt. If you want to make a point, how can you use the contrast principle to convey? Compared to the number of hours that you're working, this is what we can offer. So look for variables in their situation as you're talking with your candidates. Don't be afraid to ask them. When you understand what the key selling points are of your firm over time, then you'll start to know what questions to ask people. You can kind of bring out some variables that you can then contrast with something else within your firm. Let me talk about the next principle. And by the way, if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box. I can't see it. I think I have to unmute it, or excuse me, unshare my screen to be able to see that. But the next one is scarcity. Sale ends Friday. As soon as we know that there is an expiration date to something, then we're going to take action. What happens to the value of items which are rare? They increase. Something that is rare has perceived value. When you talk about the uniqueness of your firm, and it's truly distinct, and I'll give you some ways that you can drill down on some of that here later on. But when you find variables that are unique, that you can say that nobody else can say, that offers up scarcity. We're the only firm that offers this to associates. We're the only firm in the Northeast that has this. And you can actually insert this into your narrative by finding credentials and pushing them out to the market through social media. We are the only firm that does this. We're the only firm that has a weekly mental health webinar series with mental health coaches for all of our associates and partners to attend. You can create that scarcity just by being creative and finding ways that you can offer value to your current firm, as colleagues, and future ones. The next principle of influence is social proof. Reviews. Reviews make a difference. And I'm not talking about reviews for you on some of the career sites. I'm talking about reputation. What do people say about your firm? With me as a headhunter, I get a placement fee when I present a candidate who gets hired. So when people ask me about this firm's opportunity, what do you think of that firm? Well, you want to go through me? I think it's great because I get a placement fee. I'm being honest here. I have an agenda. So I've made it a rule never to give my own opinion. I will give opinions of other people. So let's say you're in a leadership role and you personally will benefit by hiring this future colleague. Don't give your opinion because you have an agenda. Give the opinion of others that have already made that decision. That's what social proof is. Think of it like this. You're at a restaurant and here's a restaurant here, here's one across the street. One restaurant has a 15-minute wait. The other one is completely empty. Come on in, have a seat. Nobody else is here. Which one are you going to choose? Well, you're probably going to choose the one with the 15-minute wait because other people made that decision. So when you're selling your firm, look for stories. What are the stories that other new laterals can give you who've been with your firm for a few years? How has your firm improved their condition? And you can take those stories and use them to talk to prospective laterals. I don't think it should be your own opinion. If you're in a role where that's your job is to recruit, your job is to bring new people in. You're the head of strategy, you're the chief talent officer. Give stories from people that don't have a stake. Some firms, I've suggested that they do this, they put testimonial videos on the web. One of my clients has its own careers YouTube page where you can see one video after another of new partners coming in, new associates. How is their firm different? How has their firm improved their condition? And not necessarily on a professional level, but on a personal level as well. Here's the thing about these decisions that candidates are making. They are making emotional decisions. I remember I had this one partner I was working with, very, very calculated. You know, he's going to have the pros and cons, add them all up, look at the, assign a numerical value to each variable, add them up. And I mean, that's how he was doing this. And I told him, I said, you're going to make an emotional decision. He says, no, I'm not. I said, yes, you are. How do I know that? Because you're human. In spite of being super smart, you're still human, and it's okay. You want to be safe. You want to make the most clear decision, but it's okay to get excited about that. And in fact, if it's between one firm and another, the firm that has the most emotional appeal will be the one that people go to. We are people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let me talk about one more principle, and then we're going to talk about some other concepts. The principle of liking. Here's a picture of my dog and my cat during the crisis. I mean, these two they're massive cuddlers. Dogs and cats getting along in our home. How about that? They like each other. People want to buy from those they know, like, and trust. When you're on Zoom, don't forget to smile. It feels contrived. Right now, I can't see anybody, but I'm smiling. It feels contrived. But if I'm my normal self, I'm going to be looking like this in the camera, right? So when you're doing Zoom meetings, remember to smile. And you don't have to be disingenuous about that. You don't have to give people hugs when you meet them. Shake their hand, be friendly, be polite. And isn't it interesting that we have to remind people to be this way? Some firms have actually, I mean, I wouldn't charge them because they're existing clients. I've actually done seminars to their partnership, teaching them how to interview and telling them that when you're interviewing your candidates, it shouldn't seem like a deposition. So what happens if your deal falls apart? Are your clients going to pay your fee? No. Don't treat it like a deposition. It's an interview. You have to show a little bit of heart, a little bit of warmth when you're talking to people. And another concept I wanted to share with you. So those are the principles of influence. And I put Cialdini's website, Influence at Work. He's written several books on this if you want to study further on that. Another concept is thinking of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And I apologize, my slide didn't show up, but I'll tell you about that. Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, Bill Moyers, a journalist interviewed him, and the audio became a PBS hit back in the 1980s. Joseph Campbell was a professor of mythology at Sarah Lawrence College, and he talks about the hero's journey. Every story has the same theme to it. The hero falls into the pit. He finds a sage that gives him a magical device, and he rises from the pit, forms a team, a band of followers, and together they go through intense character development and slay the evil dragon. I mean, that's a story of Star Wars and every other great story out there. And that's the arc. That's the arc where I try to paint that picture when I'm talking with candidates. What's the problem? People are going to hire you because you can solve a problem. What's the problem? What's the strategic void? I've got one client. We have a void with the generic pharma litigation, and I've got somebody that solves that problem. Here's somebody that's looking for a firm that doesn't have conflicts. They can come in and solve the problem. They can be the hero. So when you think about your strategy and you have that opportunity and you're conveying this to your candidates, don't be afraid to say you're somebody that can come in and be significant because we have this void. Someone like you can be the hero. You don't have to use that word exactly, but that's exactly what we're talking about. That story is always attractive to people. So when we talk about narratives, what is the problem that your firm solves in the life of an attorney? I would recommend surveying your colleagues. And you can do a blind survey. As we are looking to improve our recruiting efforts, please tell us what are some of the problems that our firm has solved for you. People that come in 2 years, they're new, they're getting integrated. How have you been able to improve their condition? People that are in the middle, and then people that have been there for a while. What attributes would they give your firm? And what stories can you compile together to accurately and authentically convey this narrative? How are you going to do that? So I would recommend giving surveys to your colleagues. And you can say, we have a recruiting initiative. We want to get serious and improve our internal processes of recruiting because it's much more intense, it's much more competitive. So we have an initiative to increase and improve our recruiting protocols. We're looking for stories and talking points. And you can even ask them on the survey, would you be willing to interview new prospective people coming in? And this is part of good firm citizenship. And I would even recommend, if it's important to you, come up with some sort of a training program that doesn't have to be a day, it can be an hour. How can you train your partners on how to recruit? What questions? Some of the things that I shared now, come up with the training protocol. And that's the thing with the persona of an effective attorney is that you have all the answers, but we know that's not always true. This isn't a core competency of the people that are doing intellectual property litigation in your firm. That is their core competency. So this is something that needs to be focused on to teach them how to do this. So ask for help. We're looking for stories. We're looking for talking points that we can share with prospects who are interested in our firm. How has our firm solved your problems? In those different categories, what attributes and what stories? And you may want to reach out to those people. Would you be willing to be on video sharing some of these stories? And when they're on video, make sure you coach them to smile because make sure that you deal with a professional videographer that can put light on them and make sure that it looks really good. Because I mean, the worst thing in the world is to see smart people sitting in the dark, right? So I'd recommend working on that narrative. Think of this as client development. Like I said, this is an initiative to increase recruiting. And the thing about this is that those firms that don't improve their recruiting protocols, those are the ones that are going to be losing people because it is a zero-sum game. There are only so many firms out there. It's not an unlimited supply of talent. So let me talk a little bit more about distinction. The question that you need to ask yourself is this: what attributes can your firm claim about itself that no other firm can claim? Whenever I'm meeting law firm leaders, like I said, they're all telling me about culture. But culture, it's like nutrition. It's not going to get me interested to go to a restaurant. I want to go to a restaurant that's different, that has good food, that has good reviews, where I know that I'm going to impress my wife if I take her to this place. If it's all about nutrition, that's not very impressive. So what attributes, what can you say about your firm that nobody else can say about theirs? First time I asked a law firm, I was with the executive committee of a big firm. I said, what can you say about your firm that nobody else can say about itself? You would have thought that I asked for a moment of silence because nobody said anything. They had to think about that, and that's okay. I talked a little bit about this before, but you could have initiatives. We have a mental health initiative, and we have an executive coach that we've hired for a year to help our people improve their mental health. Everybody's doing diversity. That's good. Any sort of marks on that, that's good. You have to have that, but that's like airbags. With no disrespect to diversity initiatives, but that's a normal thing now. That's something that you have to have. And if you don't have it, it's like a car without seatbelts. It's kind of weird if you don't have that. You need to have that. But what are some things that you can build in? Some firms I've talked with where they've worked with coaches, they've hired coaches that have helped their associates and their partners work on their business development skills to get authorship opportunities, to become a guest on podcasts within their industry niches, to raise their brand awareness. Other things related to the firm. One firm won an award from the Financial Times for innovation. That was a feather in their cap. They worked really hard at that. What can you say about your firm that nobody else can say about their firm? So you need to think about that because that's what you need to start with. We're the only firm that does this. Here's another way to think of it. When you look at the first person to cross the Atlantic, who was that? It was Lindbergh. Who was the second? Nobody knows. Who was the third? Nobody knows. Nobody remembers. Who was the first female aviator? Amelia Earhart. She was the first female aviator to cross the Atlantic. So if you can't be number one, be number one in a category. What can you claim about yourself that nobody else can claim? You need to get that very clear in your mind. I've got 3 other points here that I think could help you, and then we can open it up to Q&A. Look at the team makeup. These are the different roles that you have on your firm for your recruiting protocols. You need to have a quarterback. Sometimes that is a high-level staffer. Sometimes it is a partner that's taking an interest, leading the recruiting initiatives. I've seen it where the partner's doing this, plus also billing time. And I've also seen the partner that used to be billing time that now is just doing this and has direct access to the leadership. This is somebody that everybody likes. Everybody's going to willing to help out John. in his role in driving partners and groups to their firm. That's your quarterback. That's somebody that if the process slows down, that person can get involved and keep things moving forward. You also have to have leadership support. The leaders of the firm, the chairman, they've got to be champions of this. They have to talk about this at retreats. They have to talk about their recruiting initiatives at meetings. They have to bring it up. Some firms have had chairman emeritus work on this, where the former chairman is now full-time getting involved in lateral recruiting. And then who are the team players? Those are the partners that are going to be interviewing candidates, and even associates that are going to be interviewing candidates, both partners and associates. Why not have associates interview partners that are coming into the firm just to check them out and to give the kind of perspective that only an associate can give? Now, who is the advocate? I think it's always good to have somebody that is supporting this candidate's advocacy, and it could be somebody that they know. It might be the practice group leader. There should be somebody within the process that connects with this person that might even be the sponsor of this candidate. Some firms will have a specific sponsor assigned to them. I'm your sponsor. I'm working with you as we go through integration and the recruiting process. Reach out to me. And then finally, connectors. What I mean by that, those are the people that know the candidate. Those are the people that the candidate went to law school with or worked with at a different firm. And let me tell you about that in a second. I'm going to come back to the previous slide. Who are those people your candidates already know in your firm? We subscribe to a tool, and I've used this with their permission, called Leopard Solutions, leopardsolutions.com. They have all sorts of legal data. They track partner and associate movement. Thousands of firms all over the country, starting to do globally as well. I think they do globally also. I subscribe to just the US section for partners and associates. And they have a new tool called a Recruiter Connection Report, where we can type in the firm's name and we can upload a list of people or choose a certain attorney by name. We press a button and then we find out who that attorney knows within that firm. So as you have people that are interviewing with your firm, you can type them into this. Who are the people this candidate knows within our firm? We had one candidate that was on the fence about interviewing with a certain client of ours. I'm just not sure about them. My colleague, who is an associate candidate, my colleague who did it, he found 3 people that candidate knew in this firm. And he told the candidate, these are 3 people that work there. The candidate called all of them and told my colleague, I'm interested in interviewing with them now. And he's getting an offer. So each deal many times is brought across the finish line just by a hair. And we don't know what it is that's going to cause that deal to close or what's going to keep it moving forward. Many times it's going to be the connections that people have. So if you can find out who this person went to law school with, who this person may know within your firm, have those people on the interview. Those are your connectors. And the final point I wanted to make here, then we can open it up to Q&A, is improve your process. This is what we have for an internal process within our recruiting company. Years ago, I was a naval officer. I was on a ship when I was a surface warfare officer. Then I got to be a leadership trainer. The Navy had an initiative called Total Quality Leadership, which was derived from W. Edwards Deming's management concepts called total quality management. Deming was a pioneer in the quality movement, teaching about continuous process improvement. As you measure things, you can improve the process. So I would recommend, look at your process. What are the variables that you can measure as you go through it? How can you use different charts and graphs and other forms of statistical process control to make improvements? One idea is to flow out your recruiting process. If you've know people that have ever done computer code, this is how they'll write code. It starts with a circle. The beginning and the end are circles. The line indicates, where you see with the arrow, indicates the direction of the action. Each square or rectangle is a step in that process. And when you come to a triangle or a diamond, that's a decision point. a yes or a no in many cases. So any significant momentum or traction in the campaign, if yes, then we continue on that. We submit candidates. If no, then we have our own protocols written there. But that's just to give you an idea that you can create this on Microsoft Word. As you look at your process, flow it out. We don't know what our process is. We have this step-by-step process. Well, that's fine. When you put it on visual paper like this, then you'll know. And I'd recommend, if you've never done this before, work with management consultants to help you do this. Have a team meeting, dry erase board, and you flow this out. And then you put it on paper. The more time you spend in the planning, the easier it is when you execute. And then finally, this is my information. I'm at the Attorney Search Group. That's my own company. I started it way back when. I've been recruiting, like I mentioned, since 1995, and legal since about 2010. Last year, I started a podcast called the Rainmaking Podcast. And I do that because when I talk to partners, they don't want to talk to me until they're ready to move, but they care about getting new business all the time. So I interview experts each week on client development. You can find it on Apple Podcast, or just Google it. We're a top 3% podcast. And hopefully that will give you some value. We're on episode 89 this week. And Lindsay, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop my share. And if people have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those and see if I can help out.
That was really great, Scott. I enjoyed that
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Lindsay.
And yeah, if people have questions, we've got the chat, which is open. You just click on that on your screens and you can stick your questions in the chat. I'll give people a couple of seconds.
Great.
And I have been a guest on your podcast, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
But we've actually met in person through the Empowered Women's event, which is also coming up in June 2nd, again this year. But Scott hosted our first in-person conference. He was our MC back in San Francisco.
Yeah, that was right before the crisis, right? December?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, just a couple months before.
Crazy. Yeah, I remember we sat next to each other at dinner afterwards.
We did. Yeah, that was so nice. And Sharon's asking if the slides can be shared for future reference and circulation in their firm.
Absolutely. I'll send that to you when we're done, Lindsay. Then you can pass it out to your group.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Sharon's with our member firm in Montreal.
And I'm going to give you another resource. I'm going to put this in the chat box. I'm on the board of the National Association of Legal Search Consultants, which is a trade association, if you can imagine such a thing, for legal headhunters, which means two things. Number one, the parties are a lot of fun. And number two, we have credentials. We have ethics. I'm on the ethics committee. We have a code of conduct that all our members have to follow. And in fact, many firms that are also members, actually, they're not necessarily members, but a lot of law firms have adopted our code of ethics, incorporated in their placement agreements with legal recruiting firms.
Well, that's great.
Where they say, yeah, you must abide by the code of ethics of the National Association of Legal Search Consultants. Mm-hmm. There's a directory of member recruiting firms. So if you're looking for a legal recruiter, there's a ton of them. I know pretty much all of them because I've been a member of that group, but that's a group that has can help you all out if you're looking for people to help you recruit for your firms. That would be a resource I'd recommend.
Fantastic. Well, I don't see any other questions, but I'm going to also send out Scott's contact information when I send out the slide deck as well. So we really appreciate you presenting today, Scott. This has been really informative. And as I mentioned, I will be sending out Scott's contact information. So yep, as Scott says, they're actively recruiting for laterals. So if anybody needs anything from Scott, you can contact him directly. And thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
All right, we'll be speaking again soon.
Bye.
Bye.